Okay, so we're gonna step to the side right here. Cast that. One there, and pop. And pop. What is going on, my fellow nerds? Operator Otter here, and today we're going to be talking about the new arc buffs that have come to the Sorcerer, which I do believe have really put the Sorc into a much better position, especially when it comes to the campaign, because if anybody has played the campaign as a Sorc, it is truly one of the most abysmal and soul-crushing experiences, especially when you get to the Act 2 boss, because we just don't have any single target damage. The reason being for this is that before the nerfs, the way the arc worked is that it would give you bonus damage for each remaining chain that was actually built into the ability. It would chain less times, it would give you much more damage per chain. It would give you 10%. So this meant that you could have, in the beginning, I think it was 3 chains, so when you're against a single target, your arc actually just did 30% more damage against that single target, which is what allowed us to give just enough single target damage to actually get through the campaign. They have taken that away from us and just said, hey, now arc is going to chain a bunch more times, which makes it much better for ad clear, but now we have no single target damage source because our sparks cannot last long enough and do not deal enough damage, nor do we cast them fast enough for them to actually start taking the role of being a single target damage spell, which makes leveling a really abysmal experience. So what did Grinding Gear Games do? Well, they added this new effect to Arc called Pulse, that when Arc hits a shock target, it will deal this amount of damage. This amount of damage is equal to 60% of the base damage of Arc. It also radiates out with a form of AoE, which introduces another form of quadratic scaling into the game. So if you are a math nerd and you understand what that means, go have fun with that. But what this does is that this 60% bonus damage to the base damage of Arc is actually 30% more than what it was pre-nerf. So now our single target damage has actually gotten even stronger than it was in the original league when it comes to our leveling experience. So for those of you who are in the leveling portion of playing a Sorc and you are within the first 2 acts of the game, the way that I would do this is that you use acceleration and inspiration on your spark. You use overabundance and conduction on your Orb of Storms. And what you'll do is you'll come up to a target, you will cast your 2 Orb of Storms, you'll start casting your sparks. This will cause the Orb of Storms to pulse out, and because Orb of Storms has a higher base damage than Spark, it will have a higher chance to shock on top of the conduction going out. So you'll shock the target really fast. As soon as the target is shocked, you just sit here with your arc on Unleash and consider casting. We will talk about what Unleash does, but it is very strong in the burst, and you just sit here and you will arc through the duration of the shock. Once the shock falls off, you will do the same thing over and over again, and this will give you a lot of single target damage. Also, when you are going through your ads, just make sure to do your Orb of Storms and arc immediately with the Unleash. This is going to blow things up. And when you do get into Act 3 and you get access to Mana Tempest, run Premeditation into it, and then when you are going up, just come up, Mana Tempest, Arc. That should do some clear. If it's a little bit more dense, just do an Orb of Storms, Tempest, Arc, and it will clear the entire room. Your AoE will be completely taken care of. So you're not really actually pressing Spark a lot through the entire campaign. You'll usually be pressing it when you are against like an elite and you've just used your Unleash and you don't have Unleash stacked anymore, so you're waiting for that to stack. You'll see that down here. It's at 0, 1, 2, and then you want to do it again. We'll talk about what Unleash does here in a second, but you'll be doing Spark in between those or for single target. So hopefully that helps with the little leveling guide. All right, so now let's start talking about what happens when things start to get a little dumb. All right, now understand that a lot of the information, the math that I'm about to show you, is kind of speculation. I've been using Arc through my entire process, all the way up to the point to where I killed King of the Mist at tier 4. Yes, I have done that with a Sorc. It is possible. Trust me, they do a lot of single target damage, as you saw. I've been using Arc the entire time. I know what Arc's damage is, and so when I saw what happened to the damage after the buffs came through, this is kind of the only way I can think of like how this can even be possible, and the numbers are kind of matching up to what I'm seeing on the screen in terms of my anecdotal experience. I do not have necessarily any proof that's going on here, so if anybody actually knows like what legitimately is going on, leave a comment below, let me know. But I'm just basically going to go forward with like what my theories of what's happening with the damage of Arc with Mana Tempest and Archmage with Unleash and the pulses that's going going on, the whole interaction. So let's get into that. So let's TLDR this in a simple form way so I don't waste any more of your time. Essentially what's happening is that when this pulse goes off, when a target is shocked twice, the pulse actually goes off twice. And then on top of that, the damage that we are getting from Mana Tempest being this 97% of lightning damage of the spell, on top of Archmage adding the 69% kappa damage to the actual base damage of the spell. When Unleash is going off and it's doing its first and second recast, when it says that it's doing 50% less damage, that is not what's happening with the damage of the Mana Tempest and the Archmage. It's like the Arch is doing 50% less damage, but then the added damage of the Tempest and the Archmage are still actually being calculated off of the base damage of the spell, which means they are getting their full effect on those 50% damage instances. So what happens is that you have Arc go out, and then you have Pulse hit, and then you have Pulse hit again because it's a second shock. So you have 3 instances of this damage that are going out, and those 3 instances of damage are having a Mana Tempest applied and a Archmage applied to each of them, but the Mana Tempest and the Archmage are off of the base damage of the actual Arc. But because of Unleash, you are doing it 3 times. So you have 3 for the first cast, 3 for the second, 3 for the third. And so you get 9 instances of Mana Tempest and Archmage that are scaling off of the base damage of Arc being applied when you unleash an Arc onto the target, and it causes some pretty silly damage numbers. So let's go into the Excel chart to actually show you what those damage numbers are, and then we can see one more time what that kind of looks like in a practice scenario. Okay, so here's a chart going for the down and dirty numbers of Arc. So let's imagine Arc was doing 100 damage. In the original version of Path of Exile, when it came out in December, the number of chains was less, but we were getting more damage per chain remaining. It was 10%, which means 30%, which means damage was 130. In the new version, it increased the number of chains, but we now no longer have that bonus per chain, which means only doing 100 damage against a single target. This version was what we were using to be able to actually beat the game relatively easily, and now it's having a really big effect on us. We're having a lot of trouble. With the new Arc, now what's happening is that we have even more chains than we did pre, because it's 5 instead of 3, just like here, but now if the target is shocked, we get a 60% damage buff, which is more than the 30%, so now the damage is 160. We actually do more damage against single targets, and we have more chains, so now our leveling experience is a breeze. It's very, very good. Okay, so now let's start talking about things when they start to get silly. Let's talk about Unleash. What's happening with Unleash? Unleash is stating that every 200% of a base cast time, so let's say Arc took 1 second to cast, every 2 seconds you're going to get a seal. So after 4 seconds you get 2 seals. When you unleash these seals are going to repeat the cast of Arc at 50% damage value. So you have your first cast being 100, second cast being 50, third cast being 50. Now we don't want to just use Arc over and over and over again. It's not really all that great, but what we're going to do is we're going to combine it within spell weaving of our Spark. So we're going to be casting Spark this whole time, and then boom, we're going to be casting Arc. Then Spark this whole time, then Unleash is ready, boom, we cast Arc. And this hybrid casting of Spark and Arc are actually very, very powerful. It's been netting me very good results, so I would suggest it. But in terms of the damage that's happening is that on the first cast, the Arc is going to be doing 100 because that's the base damage of Arc, and then on the second and third cast being 50%, it will be 50 accordingly. Now here's where things get weird, because Mana Tempest is going to do 97% of the base damage of the spell, which is 100, so 97. Now, Unleash says it does 50% of the damage of Arc, which means that this should be 50% of 97 with Mana Tempest, right? Well, look, I got no proof for this, but from anecdotal experience, the damage is so insane with the new changes that I cannot see this functioning any other way. I think what's happening is that with Mana Tempest and Archmage, it's actually adding the damage to the base damage of Arc, meaning it's going to add the full 97 damage on top of the 50 rather than 50% of 97. And so what happens is that you have Mana Tempest being added on the first cast, the second cast, the third cast, and the same with Archmage. And so now what happens is you get your total to be 698. This is the damage that we had post the nerf. So this is what we had before the Arcane Pulse, but after what we had in the original League without having the damage per chain. All right, so welcome to Speculation City. This is kind of what I feel like is happening mathematically, so bear with me. When the target is double shocked, that means the Arcane Pulse is going to happen twice. That's speculation number 1. This means that we are getting 2 instances of the shock of the pulse happening, which is 60% of the 100 damage, and then 30% here on the second and third cast of the Unleash. Here's where things get wonky. The Mana Tempest and the Archmage, it should be doing 97% of the 60, and it does not feel like it's doing that. It feels like the pulse is being attached to the Arc damage, and so therefore the Mana Tempest and the Archmage are actually adding the 97% to the actual Arc damage, and therefore what's happening is that that we're getting 9 instances of this 97 and 69 to give us a total of 1494, and we add that to the arc total and the pulse total, which gets us up to 1934, which in comparison to this before the buff is a 178% multiplicative damage gain, which makes sense because anecdotally we were feeling like we were doing 3 times more damage with this combo than we were before, and this kind of like mathematically aligns to what we're feeling. And what are we feeling? Well, it kind of looks like this. Pop. And pop.